My name is Christian Carlson. I'm an architect and a painter, among other things. And my life has changed a lot in the last couple of years. My wife and I decided to quit our jobs, sell our house, move away from Seattle, where we've lived for 17 years, and move here to Mount Vernon in Western Washington. We bought a big building and have turned it into retail and gallery and our painting studios and our home. So I still practice architecture in a way, but have essentially retired from the work that I used to do, which was large commercial and institutional work. And I've focused most of my energy these days on painting. In this painting, and most of the ones here, they're not really faithful to an exact location. So there's a type of painting called Plein Air Painting, which is classically what you think of artists setting up an easel in the countryside and doing a landscape. This is not that. This is the result of me having just kind of sort of meditated on the landscape in this area and then come back to my studio and started in. So none of these are specifically of one place. So not truly landscapes in that regard. They're abstract paintings inspired by the colors and the form making of the land. So in a couple of them you'll see that there's a rectangle. It's a structure. It's a structure. It isn't even really a barn because it's not the proportion of the barns. I don't know what they were, but there's long, low buildings. Maybe there were canneries, I'm really not sure. But I've seen a series of these buildings with this really exaggerated aspect ratio that just felt right, kind of matching and emphasizing the horizon line. One of the things that I wanted to focus on also in this body of paintings was the way that agricultural land, particularly in the winter, where it's bare furrows after the harvest, that the ground is scribed in an almost architectural sense with parallel lines. And that's interesting to me to juxtapose the regular order of furrows in the land or a row of poplar trees on the horizon against the otherwise natural, unaffected land. And again, quite abstracted. It's not really intended to be necessarily in scale, but this suggestion of rows and furrows and the way that the land is divided up, running right up to a coarse horizon against a really tumultuous sky. I'm an abstract painter, kind of come late to landscape painting, because this is really quite a new fascination for me. And this is probably a good example within this show of something that is suggestive or maybe evocative of landscape. It really isn't. It's a ground plane is apparent, of course, and maybe some three-dimensionality where the amber color shows up. And then the coarse kind of vertical energy in white is really intended to represent a row of snow-covered poplar trees just in the simplest possible way. Really kind of relying on just the seductive quality of the wax and the encaustic process. But I enjoy the way that there's just that hint of a landscape or hint of content, when in actuality it could probably be comfortably understood to be an abstract painting. It's been fun for me to think of the way, you look at the land where there's been farming in the winter. It's dark and it's wet and it's mucky, and if you were walking out in it, you'd be dirty up to your knees. And it's really pretty unattractive color. But then when handled in paint, or in this case wax, it can be quite beautiful. And so these really saturated ochres and every imaginable different brown and green has been fun for me to experiment with, and the wax is particularly conducive because it feels wet. You can really kind of perceive the moisture contained in the heavy clouds and the moisture in the ground. In some of these paintings, to kind of really reinforce this idea that the ground is filthy. You know, we tend to idealize a landscape. You see it from a distance and everything is quite beautiful and quite pristine. But when you really think about looking at the ground or looking at a branch or looking at a dead leaf, they're really quite filthy. And so I've, in some cases, embedded filth, embedded detritus into the wax and the ground plane. So if one looks closely at these, you'll see hair, or you know, maybe I swept up the floor into a dustpan and dumped it into the molten wax. As an architect who paints, or a painter who does architecture, it's been important to me over the years and decades that I've been doing both to really keep them quite separate, because there's a tendency, I think, with architects who paint to be too precise and too precious with painting, and let kind of the architect brain into the painter's brain and crowd that out a little bit. So in my abstract work over the years, I've tended to frustrate my own ability to carefully control the paint. So for instance, maybe use a brush that's way too big, or I typically would only mix paint from primaries directly on the canvas, and kind of frustrate my ability to make something as perfect as I might want to. In this series of paintings, because it's about agriculture, I decided to experiment with kind of letting the architect back in to the painter, into the painter's mind or sensibility. So the device of using the even rows of poplars or the even rows of furrows from agriculture became kind of a device for me for adding that rigor and that geometric regularity in. The color is derived from, believe it or not, from blueberry bushes. In the winter, and I hadn't realized this until we moved here, but in the winter, these vast fields of blueberry bushes turn quite a rich, saturated, almost blood red. I've been noticing recently that I've been having a tendency to work smaller and smaller scale, which again is a departure. Doing landscape is a departure for me, and then doing, frankly, miniatures is a departure. But I'm fascinated by it because what I'm finding is the smaller I'm working, the more concentrated the composition is. I'm not finding it to be the case that the picture becomes more and more of a close-in on a detail. It's almost the opposite. The pictures are tending to be quite a vast landscape, but rendered at 5 inches by 7 inches, which is just being a kick for me because of the compression of content into a smaller and smaller package, and the intimacy of needing to look so much more closely to see what's going on in the picture. It's fascinating to me. And so this project has been for me to take what I feel like I've learned or absorbed from the colors, the light, the quality of the place, the stillness, into a body of work that's very, very simple but rich, painted in encaustic technique, which is painting with beeswax. And that's been fascinating for me as well, because of any artistic medium, encaustic with natural beeswax is very, very close to the land. It's been fun to think that I'm making paintings using a medium that came from the same place that I'm painting, because I purchase wax directly from bee farmers, unclarified wax, melt it down, add pigment, and all of this work is from that. And so there's a very tight circle for me of the medium, the colors, the quality of the wax, the surface quality of the wax, and the content.